Scorpio Woman, the Depth Seeker, Episode 1, Love That Dissolves in Air. Chapter 1, Static in the Air. The lecture hall was too bright for the subject matter, metaphor as a map of consciousness. She'd come for the depth, the idea that words might be instruments pressed against the ribs of experience to listen for truth. He'd come, it seemed, for the debate. During Q&A, his hand shot up, voice quicksilver. If metaphor maps the mind, whose cartography is it? Authorial, cultural, neural, laughter, applause. The professor lit up, so did she. After they met by the coat rack where a draft lifted the edge of her scarf. Scorpio, he guessed, as if Zodiac were a parlor trick. She raised an eyebrow. And you like shortcuts, he grinned. Gemini, I like possibilities. They walked out into late autumn air, city leaves flaring copper under streetlights. Conversation snapped into flight, neuroscience, poetry, whether grief was a muscle or a weather system. He spoke like a magician palming coins, one idea, then another, then a third, glittering, distracting, delightful. She matched pace but felt the familiar tug toward the ocean floor, a wish to stop mid-sidewalk and ask, what are you afraid of when no one is looking? Coffee turned into a bar into a booth into the soft electric of nearness. He told stories with a comedic tilt, the professor who misread his email, the dog that stole his sandwich mid-interview. She laughed despite herself, then watched the laughter evaporate into a quiet between them. The quiet felt like a door. She turned the handle. My father didn't know how to apologize, she said. He'd buy flowers instead. She wrapped her fingers around the glass, cool as a boundary. I learned to read gestures like footnotes, but sometimes I still want the sentence that says I'm sorry. He softened, she saw it, anyone would have. That's heavy, he said gently, then flicked it away with a joke about flower shops and their loyalty cards. The moment thinned. She noted it, a wobble in the structure. Outside, steam rose from subway grates. He walked her to the station and asked for her number like tossing a coin into a fountain, careless with a wish that wasn't his to hold. She gave it because curiosity can be a kind of courage. That night she dreamed of a map with many paths, all sketched in pencil. When she pressed her palm to the paper, the lines smudged. She woke with the taste of graphite and the sense of standing at the mouth of something bright and windy. She told herself, let it be wind for once, not everything has to be water. In the morning he texted a line from Neruda, I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees, and a meme of two philosophers sword fighting with baguettes. She smiled at the first and despite herself at the second. She typed, coffee again. He replied, yes, also a lecture tonight, the ethics of jokes. She rolled her eyes and said she'd go. That evening he wore a jacket that made him look like he might be serious. During the talk he leaned in to whisper commentary, clever, not unkind, but never still. She felt herself splitting between admiration and caution. He was a kite. She had always been the hand on the string. After they kissed outside the library where marble columns watched with old, blind eyes, the kiss surprised her, not because of heat, she knew how to find that, but because for one unguarded second he went quiet. She felt the quiet like a promise forming in the dark. Then he pulled back with a quip about overdue books, and the promise dimmed. He walked her home, hands in pockets, saying he liked the way she listened. She wanted to say, I like the way you stop breathing when you're honest, but it seemed too soon to ask him to meet himself. She went upstairs and stood by the window. The city's breath rose, visible. She told herself to trust the wind. Somewhere below, he turned a corner. Somewhere above, the night kept mapping itself. Chapter 2, The Quick and the Deep. They fell into a rhythm that wasn't one. Breakfast texts, midnight links, stolen hours between obligations. His voice moved like a skipping stone, skimming subjects, a study about laughter's respiratory benefits, a thread on paradoxes, a rumor that the cafe's barista was secretly a chess prodigy. She kept asking the gravity questions. What did you fear at 10? What did you learn to hide? What would you do if you lost everything? He answered with stories that were charming detours. At 10, I feared the clown at birthday parties. I learned to hide my report card. If I lost everything, I'd busk with a harmonica. She laughed. He grinned, triumphant, as if he'd solved a puzzle. She tucked away the unfinished ache. Still, she was drawn to the way his mind flashed, the sparks of wit that lit corners she hadn't visited. He quoted poets like they were friends and friends like they were myths. He knew the best dumpling place and the exact hour the planetarium was emptiest. He could make a cashier smile and a stranger tell a secret. She noticed how often the secret had nothing to do with him. One night after a film, they wandered to the river. The water was a dark ribbon, slick and inscrutable. She told him about a dream where she sank and discovered she could breathe below. A Scorpio mermaid, he teased. Do you lure sailors with existential questions? She smiled. Only the ones who can dive. They went back to her place. The room held lamplight like a held breath. Intimacy unfolded slowly in listening and in touch. She kissed him without analysis, let the warmth of him be its own language. When desire rose, she met it, mouths mapping one another, hands learning the terrain of shoulders and back, the hush that comes when two people choose to be present. She traced his pulse where it beat steady at his neck. He exhaled, for once unadorned by commentary. They moved with care and heat, sharing closeness that was sensual and deliberate rather than performative. No need to narrate, no need to prove. When it was over, they lay quietly, her fingers making small circles at his wrist, the kind of gentle cadence that says, "I'm here." "Tell me something true," she whispered. He hesitated, then said, "Sometimes I'm afraid that if I stop joking, people will leave." The admission struck soft and real. She held it like a candle in cupped hands. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. In the morning he was aghast again, half-dressed, half-late, turning his confession into an anecdote. "See, I can do sincerity," he winked, and she watched the candle go out. He kissed her forehead and texted a pun from the elevator. She didn't expect permanence, she expected presence. So she tried a different approach, meeting him where the air moved, then inviting him lower. She organized a small dinner with two friends who liked complicated conversations. He dazzled at the table, volleying insights, asking curious questions, keeping everything buoyant. When her friend mentioned a recent miscarriage and the room reshaped around the word, he froze, then chirped, "At least now you know you can get pregnant." The table winced. She touched his knee under the table, not to comfort, but to anchor. Later she said quietly, "Not every silence is empty, love." He looked chastened, then joked about writing himself a manual. She kept noticing the swing, tenderness, then deflection, honesty, then escape. It wasn't cruelty, it was air everywhere, even in the spaces that needed water. She told herself to wait, to watch. Depth can be frightening at first. She remembered her own early refusals, the years it took to stop translating pain into performance. Maybe he just needed someone to witness his landing. But a wind that never lands can become a storm. The forecast was there, written in small weathers, unread messages when conversations got hard, flirty comments to a server right after she'd asked for reassurance, a joke that cut too close, followed by, "Don't be so serious." She pressed her lips together. Serious was how she loved. Chapter 3, The Joke That Wasn't. They kept orbiting lectures, ethics, humor, language as responsibility. He loved the humor ones. She suspected he hoped for absolution dressed as theory. After transgression in the comic, he introduced her to a woman from his writing group, a comet-tailed thing with glossy hair and a laugh that rang like glass. He flattered freely, the way some people breathe. "You're incandescent," he told the woman. "You're trouble," she replied. He turned to the Scorpio woman with a grin. "Isn't she a riot?" The Scorpio woman smiled, polite. The wind shifted. On the walk home, she said, "You can flirt. I don't mind light, but not to disappear me." He swung her hand playfully. "You're impossible to disappear." The compliment was true, and yet it dodged the point by a hair's breadth, his specialty. They stopped for wine at a small place where bottles lined the walls like books. He charmed the server. She took notes, moments like beads on a string. Back at her apartment, they sat on the floor, knees touching, arguing about whether vulnerability was an act or a condition. "Both," she said. "The act makes the condition bearable," he smirked, "or the act makes the condition performative." She set her glass down. "Do you perform your feelings to avoid feeling them?" He kissed her to change the subject. She let him, then pulled back. "I'm asking." He sighed, head knocking gently against the couch. "Sometimes the joke is a bridge," he said. "Sometimes it's a moat." She nodded. "I don't want to live in a castle," she said. "I want a house with doors." He grinned, softer. "With windows," she smiled. "And a roof that doesn't leak during storms." They curled into one another, and again the physical closeness felt like a truce, not a solution, but proof that solutions might exist. When the storm came, it wasn't dramatic. It was Tuesday. She asked if he'd read the essay she sent about grief rituals in modern households. He texted back a gif of a dancing skeleton and "too heavy for lunch break, rain check." She wrote, "I want you to meet me where I am sometimes." He replied, "I want you to meet me where I'm not drowning." She stared at the screen, heat rising like a warning flare. "I'm not drowning," she typed. "I'm asking you to wade." He didn't answer for hours. They met that night. He was light, extra charming, an apology in the form of a performance. She could have accepted she'd done it before. Instead she said, "I felt dismissed." He shrugged. It was just a skeleton gif. She held the silence, let it be full. "I don't want to feel like a punchline," she said. He laughed, then saw her face and stopped. "You take everything so seriously," he murmured, not cruel, just tired. "It's how I love," she said. They sat with it. He picked at the label on his bottle. "I don't know how to be the person you want." The honesty hit her sternum. "I don't want you to be anyone else," she said quietly. "I want you to stop evaporating when it matters." He looked away, then back, then away again, like the room was a set of doors he couldn't choose between. "Okay," he said, "okay." They made up with the careful fervor of people who sense a fault line. Skin against skin, heat and tenderness, a kiss at the hollow of the throat that said I'm here, a palm to the cheek that said stay. They moved together with presence, letting desire be steady, not a show. Later she told him about the first time she learned to name a feeling in therapy and how the naming made it less terrifying. He listened, twined their fingers, and for a long moment didn't joke. She slept thinking maybe the weather is changing. Chapter 4, Draft Warnings. The change held for 5 days, 5 days of fewer quips, more listening. He admitted he avoided calling his mother because she cried on the phone. He showed her a short essay he'd written about learning to leave parties without telling anyone. It was clever, and it was also a confession. She praised the craft and asked to see the draft before he read it at his group. You're good at making exits sound like entrances, she said. He smiled as if she'd crowned him. Then at a friend's gallery opening, she watched him float, compliments everywhere, attention like confetti. He kissed her temple and then drifted to other orbits, returning with funny stories like souvenirs. She leaned on a windowsill and observed the wind move through him. When a man with a loud laugh asked if they were serious, he answered, "We're in beta," and everybody laughed. She didn't. On the walk home, she brought it up. "Beta means test," she said. "I'm not a prototype." He looked abashed, then defensive. "It was a joke." She kept her tone level. "It made me smaller." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Why take everything so seriously?" The line cut the air between them. She felt old anger knock, the flowers instead of apologies, the way a joke can be a dismissal. "Because I exist," she said evenly. "And I'd like to be treated as existing." They didn't sleep together that night. He left with a kiss that landed on her forehead like a post-it note. Later, she stood at the window again, and this time the city's breath looked like steam from a boiling pot. He texted the next day as if nothing had happened. She replied, but with fewer words. He noticed. He always noticed. He arrived with pastries and a monologue about a podcast on attention spans. She listened, then said, "I need you to name what happened." He swallowed. "I made a joke that minimized you. I'm sorry." It was clear and direct. She felt the room ease. "Thank you," she said. "Please also ask whether joking in that moment protected you from something." He considered, "From you being mad." She smiled, sad. "And how did that work out?" He laughed, then sobered. "It's older than you," he said. "It's me." She squeezed his hand. "I know." They made love with a tenderness that felt like trying, slow, attentive, breaths meeting in the middle. It wasn't a fix, but it was honest. After, he lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. "I don't know how to do all this depth without losing buoyancy," he said. "Depth isn't drowning," she replied. "It's pressure that can make you strong." 2 days later, he canceled dinner to go help a friend workshop something urgent. She said okay. At midnight, he texted a selfie with 3 people, including the glossy-haired comet from the lecture. "We did it," he wrote. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. The next morning, she asked to meet. He suggested a rooftop bar. She suggested a park bench. He sent 3 laughing emojis and then, "Okay, bench." On the bench, she said, "I need clarity about how you flirt." He said, "I'm just friendly." She said, "Friendly that erases boundaries is not friendly." He rolled his shoulders. "You're drawing lines on the wind." She stood. "I'm drawing lines on my life." Chapter 5, The Cracks Show. The fight that followed was not theatrical. It was weary. She asked for consistency. He asked for oxygen. "I'm not a lid," she said. "I'm a person asking for trust." He said trust was heavy. She said trust is what lets the heart put its bag down. He said he wasn't ready to move in emotionally. She said she wasn't asking him to. She was asking him to stop stepping out of the room when she spoke. They took space. In the space, she returned to her rituals, morning pages, heavy kettlebells, a playlist that sounded like the inside of a storm. He threw himself into events, shows, late nights. She noticed his posts, crowds, clinks, captions with punchlines. She turned off notifications. A week later, he came over with orchids, exquisite, impractical. "Flowers instead of apologies," she said, half smiling. "Old habits," he admitted. He put the orchids on the windowsill where things either thrived or didn't. They sat cross-legged on the rug and tried to talk. He said he wanted them, but not the constant intensity. She said intensity wasn't constant, it was responsive. "If you meet me," she said, "you'll find I'm playful too." He nodded, but the nod felt like a placeholder. They tried again physically, and it felt good, body language fluent, desire steady, a kindness under the heat. She cupped his face afterward and asked, "Where are you right now?" He said, "Here." She asked, "And where do you go when you vanish?" He answered with a kiss, a way to be present without answering. She accepted the answer for a night. The next day she found a bangle under the couch that wasn't hers. When she asked, he said it belonged to his writing group friend. She dropped by to pick up a book. "We were on the couch," she said. He shrugged. "It's a couch." Her silence stretched, full of unasked questions. He added quickly, "Nothing happened." She stared at the bangle, gold catching light. "I am not a committee," she said. "I don't vote on what counts." He grew flippant when cornered. She knew this. "If we're going to police furniture, we've lost the plot." She inhaled, slow, felt her pulse land. "I'm not policing, I'm advocating for care." He rolled his eyes up to the ceiling as if an answer might be written there. "You're exhausting," he said, then winced, knowing it was the wrong thing. "So are you," she said softly, "and I still show up." They paused again. He texted photos of sunsets and said he missed her. She replied carefully. When they met, he was extra gentle, as if handling glass. She felt the suspicion that he was gentler because he was also elsewhere. The feeling lodged like a splinter she couldn't see. One night late, her phone lit up with a location share, an accidental tap. She hadn't asked for it, it simply appeared, his blue dot at an address she didn't recognize. A prickle traveled her spine. She sat with it. She trusted herself. She put on her coat. Chapter 6. The door she opened. The building was old, with a buzzer panel that listed initials and secrets. She climbed 2 flights of stairs, each step a drumbeat. She didn't know what she would find. She did know what she wouldn't tolerate. The door was ajar. Laughter floated out, light and unself-conscious. She knocked. Silence flickered, then footsteps, hers, not his. The comet-haired woman opened the door wearing a shirt that wasn't truly a shirt. Surprise bloomed, then calculation. "Oh," she said. "Hi." "Is he here?" the Scorpio woman asked, voice level. She didn't need to raise it. Truth has its own volume. The woman's gaze tipped sideways and then back. "He's in the bedroom." He appeared, hair mussed by choices, shirt buttoned wrong. For a second the room tried to pretend it was a sitcom, and then it failed. He started talking before sense could arrive. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, then tripped on his own script. "Okay, it is." The Scorpio woman stepped past him, not into the room but into clarity. The bed behind him was unambiguous, 2 pillows still warm with breath. Evidence is a kindness when gaslighting is possible. Tonight the world had chosen kindness. She met his eyes. "You said you weren't ready to move in emotionally," she said. "You failed to mention you were moving in elsewhere physically." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that once looked boyish and now looked cowardly. "I panicked," he said miserably. "About what?" she asked. "About you," he said. "About being seen." She nodded once. "So you chose to be entertained." The other woman looked from one to the other, then lifted her hands. "I didn't sign up for this conversation," she said, and walked into the bathroom, shutting the door on the wreckage. He and the Scorpio woman stood in the living room's bare light. "I could yell," she said, "but I won't." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "You're sorry for being caught. You're not sorry for being shallow." He flinched, not because the word was cruel, but because it was precise. He reached for humor even now. "At least it's not your couch." The joke fell between them like a broken instrument. She stared at him as if memorizing a consequence. "You just made this easier," she said. "Thank you." She turned to leave. He blurted, "Wait, don't end it like a courtroom scene." She paused at the doorway. "No, I'm ending it like a grown woman who honors herself." He looked pale with regret or with losing his favorite audience. "If I tell you the truth, will it help?" She met his eyes. "Truth helps me leave clean." He exhaled. "I never felt enough, so I made myself feel wanted. It was stupid and small." She nodded. "I believe you." He brightened for a heartbeat, thinking belief might be a bridge. She finished, "And I'm still done." On the stairs, she felt the tremble in her legs, not from doubt but from release. Outside, the night air was cold and honest. She breathed it all the way in. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Anatomy. She didn't collapse, she catalogued. There is dignity in inventory. What did I know? When did I know it? Where did I abandon myself to keep something airy afloat? She wrote in her journal, "He is wind, I am water. Wind can stir water into beauty and also into chop. I prefer tides to turbulence." Friends brought soup and curses and playlists with titles like Scorched Earth, Gentle Heart. She accepted the soup and declined the curses. "I don't want to turn him into a villain," she said. "I want to turn toward myself." She washed the sheets, rearranged the books, repotted the orchid he'd brought. It looked fragile, then perked. She took long walks without her phone and longer baths with it far away. She reread the Neruda line and didn't flinch. Cherry trees bloom again. She listened to the quiet and discovered it wasn't empty. It had weight and temperature. It had her. He texted predictably, apologies with ellipses, then without, jokes as offerings, then finally a message that read like a person speaking plainly. "I'm afraid of being found unfunny and unlovable at the same time. I acted like an amateur at both love and ethics." She wrote back, "I accept the self-knowledge. I do not resume the relationship." He replied, "You're so serious." She smiled despite herself and didn't answer. Some patterns do not get one last dance. At night she remembered their good closeness, the way he went quiet when touch asked him to. She let the memory exist without rewriting the ending. Intimacy had been real, betrayal had been real, her boundary was real. Multiple truths could coexist. Her choice did not have to erase the past to protect the future. She started attending a different lecture series, Rituals of Repair. In one session, a speaker said, "Depth is not the absence of light, it's light that can travel farther." She wrote it down. On the way out, someone with kind eyes asked her what drew her here. "Practice," she said, "and the hope that the next person I love will know how to breathe at more than one altitude." At home, she took the bangle from the drawer where she'd kept it. She didn't return it or throw it away. She placed it in a small bowl by the door, a reminder and a relic, not a trophy. She was not that kind of collector. A museum tag, perhaps, exhibit of a choice not to be repeated. When she finally saw him again, it was at a bookshop event. He stood too close to a cluster of admirers, performing contrition as content. He caught her eye and offered a small, real nod. She returned it, equally small, equally real. Later he sent a last message. "I hope you find someone who doesn't think air is the only element." She replied, "I will." And then she turned the page. Chapter 8, The Vow. She didn't vow never again to love. She vowed never again to love someone who refuses to love himself beyond the mask. She didn't vow to stop laughing. She vowed to laugh where respect lives. She made a ritual of choosing herself. On Sundays, she brewed tea and wrote a letter to the weak, an agenda of tenderness, tasks of integrity. She listed what feeds her depth: music that doesn't rush, people who ask and wait for the answer, movement that leaves her more in her body than out of it. She wrote, "I will not chase air, I will invite breath." In therapy, she named the places she'd bent to accommodate the wind, minimizing discomfort, translating jokes into care, mistaking momentum for meaning. Her therapist said, "What will you do when someone deflects?" She said, "I'll stop walking toward them." They both smiled, the kind of smile that recognizes a graduation. She didn't change her sign or his, she changed her choices. At a new lecture, Listening as a Craft, she met a man who didn't need the room to bend to be interesting. He didn't announce his sign, he asked how she slept. When she said, "Like a stone in a river," he nodded as if the image meant something to him too. They didn't rush toward intensity, they let it grow like something planted well. She still thought of the Gemini sometimes, not with longing but with clear eyes. She wished him a future where jokes were bridges more often than moats, where the room he feared entering turned out to be full of oxygen. She didn't need to be the one to witness that, she needed to witness herself. One evening she returned to the bench where she'd asked for clarity. The air was cool, the light kind. She spoke her vow aloud, "The sky is a good listener." "Never again someone who won't go deep," she said, and felt the sentence settle in her bones. It didn't sound angry, it sounded like alignment. On her way home, she passed the gallery where he'd called them Beta. A new show hung in the windows, photographs of bodies underwater, lit like stars. She stood there a long time, smiling at the way light moves through depth without breaking. At home, the orchid bloomed. She texted a photo of it to no one and everyone, saved it really for the folder in her life labeled Proof. She opened the window and let the night's breath in, not to blow her around, but to remind her that air can be gentle when you choose where to stand. She turned off the lamp and felt the room hold her. In the dark, she could still see the shape of her vow, bright as a promise she made to herself and kept. Like this video, subscribe, more stories like this are coming.